The title of the book that I read last week was a bit unusual, so I got to read the book. The book's title is, as translated to Korean, is Why Are There Many Weird People Around Me? This is the book's title. Two women named Sandra Lübkes and Monica Wittblum wrote this book. Sandra Lübkes is a person who usually wrote crime stories, and she questioned this. What is it that makes a normal person fall down to becoming a criminal? While researching on this, she got to write this book. Her co-author, Monica Wittblum, while having worked as a criminal psychologist for 13 years, said it in this way. I am someone who got to meet weird people more than anybody else. Her motto is, I tried to understand them again today. It is an expression that befits a criminal psychologist. In the book, it classifies 12 types of weird people. The first among these are people who take the credit for others' accomplishments. The content of the book deals with people that we can commonly see around us. In the case of students, several students make up a team to handle a group project. Then there is undoubtedly one student like this. We also know this from our children. Together, the students diligently prepare for the project, but one kid doesn't do anything and only includes his or her name in the final product, they say. Then they get so angry. We share this kind of conversation. How can there be someone like that? How can there be such a student? He or she is so unusual. These unusual people are many even in society. Such are people who take credit for others' accomplishments. With the first example as those people who do not make an effort while they want to be applauded, other examples appear easily in the book. People who easily get angry, people who often tell lies, people who have many complaints and discontentment. As the author lists down such people, they say this. People will feel unpleasant while reading this book. They may feel uncomfortable. What is the reason? It is because there appear in the book people I have met so many times in my life. People just like that. The book contains such stories of what we can commonly happen around us. Of course, the book also talks about why such people are like that, or how we must treat such people. But in conclusion, there is this part. I can also seem unusual in the eyes of others. So it is important to look back on my own self, it says. Today, we are going to share a story about forgiveness. When it comes to forgiveness, there is this person who really gave me a hard time, or there is also this, understanding a person who has made me slightly, just a little uncomfortable. For you, after you have received Jesus Christ, have you come to understand other people more? Have you come to forgive a lot? Or after you have believed in Jesus, are you still not changed at all when it comes to forgiveness? There is someone who makes this confession. After I believe in Jesus, I received a lot of grace, but I cannot come to forgive. Perhaps it seems such a thing that is not so easy. Today's message is connected to last week's message. In verse 21, in today's passage, it says, Then. When was then? It was after Jesus spoke about reconciliation with your brother or sister. Right after this. Last week's message was about two people sharing their hearts, and that when they are united and pray to God with one heart, the Lord will respond. The Lord will be with them. This was the message we shared last week. Right then, Peter asked Jesus, Forgiveness. This is a question about the limit of forgiveness. How many times shall I forgive someone? This was the question. Up to what extent is your forgiveness? We don't need to look far. In the family, to your children, I think we can know this easily when we think of how much we forgave them. Someone says this, I have put up with them as much as I can. I can bear it no longer. Then about her children, a mother can say, "It's already the third time." She's counting it, how many times she forgave them. She can forgive them no longer, and speaks of the basis that to punish them is a matter of course. I have endured enough, as much as I can, and it is only natural for me that I cannot forgive them anymore. We can know from around us that it is not unusual for us to react like this. Up to where is the limit of forgiveness? Jews commonly set the limit of forgiveness to 3 times. It is 3 times for them to forgive the greatest and the most. It is Peter who lived with this tradition handed over to him. Peter may also have wanted to ask Jesus like this, "Lord, to forgive thrice is forgiving a lot." But as he quietly followed Jesus, it seemed that what Jesus spoke was different from that of the average rabbis. Jesus recognized, he embraced Matthew the tax collector, he embraced Zacchaeus, he embraced the woman who was caught in adultery. And as he saw all this, it seemed to him that Jesus was different. So Peter is asking here a very broad-minded question. He does not speak of 3 times, but of 7 times. Shall I forgive up to 7 times? This was his question. From Peter's stance, he is asking a very daring question. I don't know if Peter may have been expectant. If I ask this question, the Lord will compliment me. Peter may have thought, "Wow, for you to think of forgiving up to 7 times, you're so awesome." Peter may have expected such a compliment. But the answer of Jesus surprised Peter a lot. 77 times, or 70 times 7 times. When Jesus said this, he is not telling us to count it. When we compute it, it is 490 times, but he is not saying here that you forgive up to 490 times. He means that we are to forgive without limits, not just 490 times, but even up to 4,900 times, even beyond that, we are to forgive to the end. That is what Jesus is saying here. We do not need to set a limit for forgiveness. The conditions for forgiveness, limit of forgiveness, we do not set these. These belong to God. What we should only think of is the motive for forgiveness. For what do we forgive? We are to think only for the motive for forgiveness. Because I have been forgiven. Even now, since I am being forgiven limitlessly, we are to forgive without limits. Jesus is telling us only to think of this motive for forgiveness. Usually, when we talk about conditions, we say that because the other person is bad, it's okay for me to be bad to that person. Because the other person is evil, I can repay him or her in the same way. Because the other person said bad words to me, I can also repay with bad words. We think a lot of these conditional things, that I am not able to forgive because the attitude of the other person is bad to me. It is natural for me that I am unable to forgive. There are many times we regard it as such. Because the other person has done something hateful to me, is it fair for me to repay him the same with hatred? Because many people stole my things, for me to steal the things of others. Can this be justified? Christian ethics is not relative ethics. That person did this to me, so I also do this. It is not something relative, but Christian ethics is an absolute ethics. As God has loved me without limits, I too do not set any limits, but get to love limitlessly. There is a story that is the same for the prisoners in a prison. Most inmates, while excluding themselves, blame their parents or their siblings, the ones who accuse them, or those who judged their case. Different things excluding themselves, different people they say that because of this, they are confined in a prison and so are full of resentments and complaints as it is. In his message today, the Lord does not allow such excuses, conditions. Jesus does not think of such things but tell us to forgive without the limit, to forgive again and again. He tells us that we are to forgive. What do you harbor in your hearts? When we harbor anger or grudge against someone, why is it harmful to us? It is not a Christian story, but there is what is called the Hercules effect. When you think of repaying grudge by grudge, it grows bigger. The anger grows bigger that in the end it rather brings loss to me. This is the Hercules effect. In Greco-Roman mythology, there is a hero named Hercules. One day, when he was going home, there was a sack that looked inflated. It was quite strange, so he got curious, so he stepped on the sack with his foot. At that moment, it grew bigger. Hercules got angry at this and stepped on it the more as it grew much bigger. He was not able to control his anger, so he beat the sack with a stick. And this sack grew so big that it totally blocked his way. The sack grew that much. Hercules was at a loss as he was in such a situation wherein he could not move forward. Then a wise man appeared to him and advised this to him. Listen, do you know what that sack is called? It is a sack of anger. You must not touch it. If you touch it, it will grow bigger and bigger that you don't be able to bear it anymore. So just leave it alone. He said, then it will grow back to its original form. A sack of anger. If we keep touching the sack of anger within us, we grow it such that later on, we won't be able to handle it anymore. We grow it such that it will cover us and not allow us to be able to move at all. Whether we have any situation like this, we must look back on ourselves. Like this, the expression of our anger should not be our motive, but where must we find our motive? We must find it in God's kingdom. In our passage today, as Jesus received the question of Jesus, he is saying this in a parable. And what is the title of this parable? It is a parable of the kingdom of God. In verse 23 of chapter 18 it says, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. About forgiveness, about forgiving 70 times 7, Jesus said this then. He said, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like. Jesus is talking about heaven here. In this world, where God reigns is heaven. If God rules over my heart, it is heaven, where God is king. A kingdom is about who is the king. So heaven is the kingdom where God is king. Is my heart heaven? If God reigns as my king and rules over me with love, then my heart becomes the kingdom of heaven. With this, Jesus talks about the story of the man who owed 10,000 talents. The people of God's kingdom, who are they? The people of God's kingdom are those who do not have enemies. If I clearly have an enemy, then I must think whether I am really worthy to be a citizen of God's kingdom. Now, there was one man who owed 10,000 talents of gold who came over. He was called to come. When we say 10,000 bags or talents of gold, at that time, it was an amount that absolutely could not be repaid even if he worked all his life, an astronomical amount that could not be repaid even with the help of all his family members. Repay your debt. Even if you and your family be sold into slavery, repay your debt. The master pressed him like this. The situation at the time was that If he could not repay his debt, his children, all his family will even have to be sold as slaves for the debt to be repaid. This was the social system at the time. He had no means to repay the debt. Helpless, it would be the end of his life and that of his family. Before the master who pressed for repayment, he begged, "Be patient with me and give me another chance. I will repay it, however it may be." Perhaps he really fell flat on his face to plead and beg. That there didn't seem to be anyone more pitiful than him. He would have pleaded in such a way that he looked really pitiful. This moved the master. He had mercy on him, so that he would not need to repay the whole debt. The debt was cancelled for him. It became such an unimaginable situation. He did not say that he will reduce the debt. He did not say that the term will be postponed. He said that he will consider it as something that didn't happen. All will be cleanly cancelled. Such that I could not believe what I am hearing, that what I never imagined to happen to me in the world has happened. In the Bible, his expression of gratitude is not shown that much, that how glad he would have been, how many times he would have expressed his gratitude, how touched he would have been to be moved to tears. Then he came out from there. With such emotions, with such glad rejoicing, he went out from there. And on his way, he got to meet one person who made him feel bad. He met one who owed him 100 silver coins. At that moment, he grabbed him and asked him to pay back his debt. "Be patient with me, and I will pay it back," his fellow begged, but he said no and put him in prison. Who heard this news? The master who cancelled his debt of 10,000 talents heard this news. It is too reprehensible. So he said, "Just as I had mercy on you, just as I cancelled your debt, you also should have mercy on him and cancel his debt. Is it not right? Is it not proper to do so?" As he said this, the master put him into prison and let him stay there until he could pay back all that he owed. Now, this is a parable about the kingdom of heaven. The heart of the one who has his debt cancelled is heaven. That we live as Christians in this world is that I live with this joy of someone who had all my problem of sin solved. That my debt has been cancelled. I am very glad and thankful of this, that now, whether it be someone who has wronged me, someone who treated me unjustly, or whoever it may be, whatever the wrong it has been, I do not have a heart to blame them anymore. My grace is so great that I do not have at all any regrets or resentments. This is the heart of heaven. Why is it hard for us to forgive? Of course, it is something that is really not easy. Why is it hard to forgive? Someone says it like this: "If I forgive that person, my pride is hurt. The moment I forgive, I become low and the other person is raised." Some people think like that. When I forgive that person, what becomes of me? Don't I have any pride? Won't I look like nothing? There are people who say that. But in reality, it is not so. The one who forgives has his or her character raised. There are also people who says this: if we keep forgiving bad people like that, this world will not become a just society. This world will become more dirty and muddier. So that kind of person must be severely punished, they say. Forgiveness. It is God who guides this world to be a just world. For me to judge that person, for me to condemn that person, for me to punish that person, Jesus tells this to us that we may not think that way, and that God is the one who leads this world. And what it is for us to do, it is to give love, to give forgiveness. We must not forget that we do not forgive by conditions. When we forgive that person, whether that person is worthy of our forgiveness, or whether that person did anything worthy of that, We must not calculate these things that we may be able to truly forgive. Without any conditions, without finding our faults, without considering at all my actions, or the pious acts that I have accomplished, that God forgave me without holding anything back, this becomes our motive. In Ephesians chapter 4 verse 32 it says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you." And in Colossians chapter 3 verse 13 it says, "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." When it comes to forgiveness, just as God forgave you in Christ, forgive one another just as the Lord forgave you. God is the standard. That God has forgiven me is the standard. Such great is the forgiveness that we have received, that we have no reason not to forgive. It is to find myself in God. If we just think of it a little, when the man who had his debt of 10,000 talents cancelled met the man who owed him 100 denarii, and the man fell to his knees pleading to him, "Give me a little more time, be patient with me." What should he have sinned there? He should have sinned himself. Right. Just a while ago, I was just like that. Just how this man fell face down, that was how I was. And with this, he should have thought of himself. I was someone who owed a whole lot more debt. I was someone who has done more wrong. I was someone more evil. He should have thought of himself in that person. This is a Christian. This is how the Apostle Paul lived. "I am a chief of sinners." He discovered himself and said that I am the one who received the greatest forgiveness. I was the worst of sinners. That is why, how many were those who harassed Paul? There were those who waited to kill him, and how many were those who brought him harm? Paul was flogged, imprisoned, threatened in all kinds of ways. But he only thought of this one thing. I was a sinner. I'm the one who has been forgiven the most. Paul only thought of this. Today, the problem of the one who owed 10,000 talents of gold is here. All too easily, he forgot that he has received grace. The Israelites went out of Egypt and passed through the desert. What the Israelites did wrong is this. When they got out of Egypt, it is that they forgot too quickly the great grace they received from God. When we forget too quickly the grace that we received, then what follows? Grumbling follows. The Israelites forgot too soon that they have been delivered from Egypt, so that when there was nothing to eat, no water to drink, they complained all too fast. Same with us. We must not too quickly forget how great is the grace that we received from God. We must remember this and remember as well how great a sinner I was, that we may also always be in the position of one who forgives, of one who loves. Here is a fearful truth. Another thing that we must not forget is this. The one who owed 10,000 talents did not forgive the one who owed him 100 denarii. Then the master summoned again the man who had owed him 10,000 talents. If you have been shown grace, if you have been forgiven, you should have also been able to forgive. Why are you unable to forgive? So he said, "I cancel the cancellation of your debt. I cancel the forgiveness I have shown you." When we look at it objectively, we think, of course, this is a man who does not know grace. But what if that is me? If that is my position? If I have not forgiven someone such that God tells me, "I cancel my forgiveness for you." If this happens, is it not so fearful? We remember the Lord's Prayer. Just as we forgive those who sinned against us, forgive us our debts. To modify this a little, just as we forgive those who have sinned against us, Lord, forgive my sins. We can change it this way. Someone says that is why he does not memorize the Lord's Prayer, because he does not want to forgive the one that he hates. He could feel that hatred. To one who has made me suffer loss, it is not easy to indefinitely forgive him or her. But in the Word today, it is grace where He wants us to focus. Forgive them. When we focus on this and only concentrate on forgiveness, it is difficult for us to live happily. Just leave it as it is. Just leave this anger. But where must we focus on as we move forward? On how much grace I have received from the Lord, how much love, how much forgiveness I have received. As I remember the grace of the salvation of the cross, it is to live as I am moved by this. So when we say we must have to forgive, it is this, that my position was that position, and that I was someone who was worse than that, but that the Lord has forgiven all my sin and has granted me such a boundless grace. When we only keep thinking of this, to be deeply affected by the grace that I have received, then we will be able to live a life that forgives with a glad heart. That you and I may live in the affection of the grace that we receive from God. I bless you in the name of the Lord, that we may live in His grace where He reigns over us.